Information is foundational to our democracy. Without information or facts, what do we have? Well, that's the question we're going to examine today. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of topics from propaganda to the truckers' convoy, the inquiry into the truckers' convoy, and of course, the Coots Crossing. So please join with me with my guest, Ray McGinnis.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
I'm delighted to welcome Ray McGinnis. Ray is an investigative researcher. He's an author, and he's also author of a great selling book around the 9/11 Commission, among other books. And he's also someone who's a senior fellow at the Frontier Center for Public Policy, and he takes a very critical insight into the world of facts, evidence, and even propaganda. So welcome, Ray.
Thank you, David. Great to be with you.
Well, Ray, I'm really excited about our conversation about truth, and we're going to be diving through some very interesting case studies from, your great insight and research into these cases that are well known to many Canadians. But I wanted to just, before we dive into that, talk a little bit about propaganda. If you think about the word propaganda, how do you describe it, Ray?
Yeah, it's putting forward a narrative based on half-truths or out-and-out lies. It often propaganda involves pushing a story in the news, which is shocking and confusing and even traumatic to the readership or the viewership, and then people, ordinary citizens, get quickly hooked into the drama of that narrative, and then because of the emotional fusion with the story, are not able to detach from the story they're being told, to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, what am I being told? Like the ability to scrutinize. I mean, if propaganda is done well, the ability of the average citizen to scrutinize what they're being told and to sit back and question the narrative is almost evaporates, because it's so people feel scared, vulnerable, frightened, angry at the target that's being accused of being responsible for the terrible story in the news.
Yeah, well said. So why should we care about this issue, Ray? When you look at all your experience looking at these kinds of quote case studies of lots of propaganda and a lack of truth telling, why should a Canadian citizen care about this?
One of the hallmarks of democracy is, it's free speech and a vitalized citizenry. Citizens need to ask the tough questions, and I would say that there was a time in Canada where the media did that job well. There was a willingness on the part of the press to ask the pertinent questions and to not shy away from them. And they would get the good answer you needed to hear in order to feel good about your government. But it seems now what we have is a media that's compliant, that's cautious, that doesn't want to rock the boat. We need to change our habits about how we digest the news, because we need to not simply repeat what we're told, but we need to watch it. We need to step back and observe, and to be able to have important kitchen conversations. Otherwise, we end up being a nation of Stepford wives or something, where we're just simply on automatic pilot, and carrying around unexamined premises that may not be true and that could cost us even the kind of democracy that we've enjoyed.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Ray. So I did want to turn to our first case study, and that's a little bit about reflecting on the truckers' convoy. That's certainly been a long story. There's been a lot told about it and reflected on it. And I'm really curious about if you can briefly summarize some of the chronology and about how that developed in Canada from your perspective, from kind of a historical point of view. How did the convoy start and what happened?
So it all kind of begins with the lead up to the 2021 September election. In the United States, in August, the Center for Disease Control Director Rochelle Walensky conceded on an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN that actually the new vaccines didn't prevent infection or stop transmission. And so it would be left for individual people to go ahead and get their vaccine if they think they need it or not. But then all of a sudden, our prime minister decided in late August of 2021 that anybody who didn't get a vaccine was an anti-vaxxer. They didn't have a right to get on a plane or a train or cross the border, and talked about, do we tolerate these people during the campaign? And so that kind of rhetoric then just sped up over the fall, and people were being told you may not be able to buy groceries in different maritime provinces and so on. And so then in the kind of run up to building up more and more kind of affect in the general public, in November, the federal government decided that they were going to require all truck drivers that drive alone in their cabs, that if they were going to enter Canada, that they would have to be vaccinated. When Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland was on the stand at the Public Order Emergency Commission on the 24th of November of last year, she was pressed about the, why the truck drivers, and she conceded that really they were trying to get the truck drivers, like, let's make sure the truck drivers have to be vaccinated as a signal to other Canadians who are unvaccinated that they need to get vaccinated. This was a like a strategy to signal to other unvaccinated people they need to get vaccinated. And there was stories on CTV demonizing the protesters, suggestions that they were white supremacists and racists and hillbillies and insurrectionists and so on.
So there was a decidedly clear decision made by the government at the time to portray them, to demonize them. And so we did want to show a little bit of a clip here. And it was interesting that CBC even made a suggestion about who their foreign funders were. So if we could go to that clip.
I don't know if it's far-fetched to ask, but there is concern that Russian actors could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, but perhaps even instigating it from the outset.
Well, again, I'm going to defer to our partners in the public safety, the trained officials and experts in that area. What I can tell you is that we do have the police resources on site right now who are watching the conduct of this convoy very carefully and who are providing direction and guidance to residents to ensure that there is a peaceful protest, but at the same time providing direction and guidance to residents. And obviously, it's important that Parliament continue to function. It's important that we provide essential services to Canadians and those in the area, and all of that will continue on the strength of the advice that we're getting from police and other partners in the public safety apparatus. This is not a convoy that is about freedom. If we want a gateway to freedom and getting back to normal, we need to continue to get vaccinated. That debate has been had and is settled. It's been settled by evidence and science and data, and we'll continue to follow that in order to get there.
Wow. So that's kind of the epitome of the message there that I see, Ray, is the message was essentially, as I picked that up over numerous times, is if you've got to get vaccinated, and if you don't, then you're against freedom and there's no other point of view here. Is that kind of the central message that you picked up in your research, Ray?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, there's the CBC with its report about Russian actors being behind, if it had not been for Russian agents in Canada whispering in the ears of truck drivers in Medicine Hat or Swift Current to go to Ottawa, they'd be staying in the, playing, in the bar somewhere, So the CBC ombudsman reprimanded the CBC in October of 2022, saying to the national broadcaster that they have a responsibility to their viewership, and that they need to report stories based on evidence. And here there was absolutely no evidence to support that allegation.
So where the heck did that come out of, Ray? Is there any revelation as to why journalists would wade in so readily about Russian funding of all things? It seems so absurd.
I do not know why you would have that. I mean, there was indications that there was likely going to be perhaps, and there indeed was by the 24th of February or so, a war between Russia and the Ukraine. So maybe this was just one of a number of things to let's blame Russia for this. I can only speculate. Is nonsense.
Yeah, it's utter nonsense. So the convoy picked up speed. It came to Ottawa. We found out that on the ground it was remarkably peaceful. And in fact, if you think of an incredible team of people from Bridge City News actually went to Ottawa. They decided to make that decision to go to Ottawa and see on the ground and report from there. It was fascinating from my perspective to see the contrast in reporting from mainstream media that tried to kind of portray the convoy as violent, as unruly, whereas when Bridge City News reported it, it was stunningly peaceful, and they went after the good, bad, and the ugly stories. And so one of the assertions in that clip there was that somehow that the truckers were up to a lot of really bad things, like stealing people's food and things like that, when in fact that wasn't the case, was it, Ray, on the ground? No,
you have a lot of hearsay evidence. I mean, the story about truck drivers stealing food from the Good Shepherd shelter. Mm-hmm. I mean, contrast with what's happening on the ground, you have many Ottawa citizens actually going to see, well, what's this protest about? The protesters are overwhelmed with the generosity of people bringing food to them. They don't need to go and and mug anybody to get food because they're being brought pizza. You've got oodles of food on site. So there's no need for that. And the reports of police, the Ottawa Police Service, the Ontario Provincial Police Intelligence Unit, their estimations were a shocking lack of criminality, peaceful. It's like a family event. I mean, there were thousands of children, especially swelling on the weekends when they would have as many as 18,000 people. You'd have several thousand children who would be there and playing with snowballs, hockey, large Lego, bouncy castles, and so on.
It was a very peaceful affair. And the reports around violence, I think, were fascinating as well. Those didn't really have any basis of fact either. Were they all made up? What's your research tell you on that one, Ray?
Well, during the length of the protest, before the day that it got shut down by the mounted police and others, I understand there were 4 or 5 people in downtown Ottawa who arrested for assault. But those seem to be concurrent to the protest and not by people who were protesters that were assaulting anyone. Because, like Tamara Leach and others who've been arrested on mischief or charges or counseling mischief charges are the poster persons of who are hitting the headline news. If there was somebody who had assaulted a police officer in Ottawa, we would surely know the name of that person, and they surely would have been charged. It would be on the front page of the Ottawa Citizen and every other newspaper coast to coast. But there wasn't anyone who was a protester who punched a police officer. And also, you have all of the protesters. They had to sign a code of conduct. Before once they arrived, and if they didn't agree to it, they had to leave. And you also have block captains who are in constant contact with the local police to make sure that, I mean, if the police knew of anything that was, that bordered on criminal activity of any kind, they were to call, former Army Captain Tom Marazzo or a number of other people right away. But Tom Marazzo says he never got phone calls about any kind of criminal behavior. And the intelligence unit OPP staffer Patrick Morris said he was shocked by the lack of criminality.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So you have that kind of information and facts regarding the convoy, and in the meantime, there's another narrative. You used the word narrative earlier to describe propaganda. So I want to play a clip from the Prime Minister about that.
Canadians were shocked and frankly disgusted by the behavior displayed by some people protesting in our nation's capital. I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated by those who hurl insults and abuse at small business workers and steal food from the homeless. We won't give in to those who fly racist flags. We won't cave to those who engage in vandalism or dishonor the memory of our veterans.
So there you have it. There's a kind of again, another summation of a narrative that portrays the convoy as, frankly, a bunch of racists and violent and thieves. So what's your take on that? What was going on there? Why would the Prime Minister speak in those terms that wasn't really based on fact? It didn't appear to be.
Well, you've got all of this narrative about the flag, like the Nazi flag. I mean, I listened to a former CBC, Globe and Mail, CTV, long career in the press, Rodney Palmer, testifying before the National Citizens Inquiry. And he was walking up and down the length of Wellington Street and other streets in the center of all of the protests, never once saw a Nazi flag. Mm-hmm. And yet this one Nazi flag ends up being what the Prime Minister focuses on. But it just seemed too convenient that this would be the story. And it's simply the story that we were hearing in the mainstream media just doesn't add up compared to these live on the street reports. And under testimony on the 25th of November at the commission in Ottawa, commission staff asked Prime Minister Trudeau, when he was, were they first thinking about invoking the Emergencies Act? And he said, well, from the very beginning. So, wow. So if that's the case, wouldn't it be helpful if you want to invoke the Emergencies Act from the very beginning and are really eager to find some reason to actually invoke the act and say that we have to invoke it because it's the last resort. We can't call in the army. We can't declare a riot or anything else. Let's just go full on with the nuclear option. It's beneficial then if you want to demonize the protesters as deplorables who cannot be, who nobody can talk with. Mm-hmm. Even though the city of Ottawa was having senior staff talking with the protesters and had a plan in place to remove 75% of all the vehicles by the end of the 16th of February, and you don't need trucks to tow vehicles who've already left the block.
Yeah, exactly.
The disconnect between what was being said by Marco Mendicino and the Prime Minister and others and what was happening on the ground is just, we have to correct the historical record because the media failed to tell the story.
Well said. So speaking of the story, another part of this interesting case study, if I can call it, is the whole issue of border crossing at Coutts in southern Alberta. So if you could lay out a little bit of the background, Ray, what was that situation about?
So there were numbers of protests that sprung up across the country at different border points in support of the convoy in Ottawa once it got established. Mm-hmm. And one of these was at the Coutts, Alberta, Sweetgrass, Montana border point and nearby Milk River, Alberta. And the protesters had been, by the 1st of February, Premier Jason Kenney had accused the protesters of having assaulted a police officer it turned out later that the local spokesperson for the RCMP, Corporal Curtis Peters, said actually the altercation was between two civilians and had nothing to do with the police at all. But never mind, maybe Kenny was ill-advised, but in any event, it was another part of a kind of a story that gets out there that people still repeat to this day. And then there was four men, two who were schoolhood chums, and the other two who they had never met together as a foursome before the Coutts protest, and these four men were arrested variously on the evening of the 13th of February and around noon hour on the 14th in Calgary, and accused initially of mischief over $5,000, but then by the end of the day on the 14th, they were accused of conspiring to commit murder of RCMP officers.
Wow. So these were very serious charges, and that's exactly during the same time as things are happening in Ottawa as well. Is that right?
It is. And the story in Coutts regarding the weapons that were then showcased with an RCMP cruiser behind them was sort of exhibit, well, if you don't think that what's happened in Ottawa is bad enough, and you don't think that the blockade at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, Detroit is bad enough, well, here's these people who've been arrested in Coutts, and it's sort of a, it's our goal in the first period in the overtime, and we've clearly made the case for the Emergencies Act, if nothing else. It was sort of the way it was presented.
We do want to show you a clip on that Coutts blockade.
Go on blocking the border crossing until all COVID restrictions were lifted. But protest organizers say this changed things. A cache of weapons, including long guns, handguns, and body armor.
These weapons were brought by people who had the intent on causing harm.
13 people were arrested. Most now face charges of mischief and weapons possession. 3 have also been charged with conspiracy to commit murder.
Our message has been one of peace, peaceful protest, and to keep that message strong, we felt the best decision was to move out.
As protesters left Coutts at a second protest camp near Milk River, police took names and collected information. Still under investigation, who brought the weapons to Coutts and what was their intent?
Yeah, so to be clear, Ray, if those weapons were taken under custody, they would be carefully bagged up so that you could protect any DNA evidence on the weapon itself. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, I've listened to Donald Best, who's a former Toronto police detective and sergeant, and he talks about how precariously the guns are leaning against the table. I mean, one bump and a whole bunch of them would fall to the ground. It seems to him, and I agree, that it's more of a photo op than a serious way of handling crucial evidence.
Yeah.
And so it's just I mean, contrast that with what was done with the shooter of multiple people in Nova Scotia a number of years ago, and the RCMP took months before they released any photos or display of any weapons because out of a concern of forensic integrity.
So in this case, we're going to keep our eyes on that case. So I think you bring a healthy skepticism and a research to bear on these. So my question to you, Ray, would be, what are policy changes that need to happen so these things do not happen again? And what can citizens do?
Well, I think that we need to have, as far as the Emergencies Act, we need to have really solid checks and balances regarding what consists of a national emergency. We need, before a national emergency happens, if the Emergencies Act is the last resort, you have to already have been able to show that the police have declared a certain protest a riot and they weren't able to handle it. You also need to be able to show that you've already brought in the army and they couldn't handle it, and then you declare a national emergency, perhaps. Right. And you also have to be able to have politicians be held accountable for the catastrophizing statements that they're making to the press. I think that we as citizens need to practice media literacy skills. We need to pay attention to the stories in the news, the headline stories that grab our attention. If we are feeling especially emotionally pulled in a strong way by a story, we need to say, okay, I notice I'm feeling scared or agitated or angry about this story. And then we need to give ourselves a task, which is to say, okay, I've just finished watching the CBC or Global or CTV or reading the Toronto Star, the Edmonton Sun, and I feel the following things as a result of their report. But now I'm going to assign myself a task, which is to find out in the next week or two what any other sources of media out there are saying that provides a different angle, a different slant. Not necessarily that other media source will be something that I decide to land on as definitive either, but at least to allow myself to grapple with some contrasting points of view. Otherwise, we are simply held captive to narratives, to shocking stories in the news that may not be being brought to the fore and told to us out of the best democratic traditions. Because unfortunately, human beings, including those in leadership, sometimes want more power, and sometimes more power for them means less power and less freedom for us.
I think that's very well said, Ray. It's we need critical thinking more than ever, and the truth does really matter. So I want to thank you, Ray McGinnis, a senior fellow at Frontier and investigative researcher. We're so glad that you could join us today and talk about propaganda and also in the age of 2023.
Well, great to be with you, David. A pleasure to be part of Frontier, and thanks so much.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.